Today, I'm going to help end the confusion of structuring your layouts with the CSS grid, and I'm going to show you multiple ways to do it. Hey everybody, what's up? Gary Simon here. So today we're going to take a look at the CSS grid. I've messed with it a few times on this channel, but really I wanted to talk about a specific topic, and that means setting up the actual layouts and the rows and the columns and using two different methods for doing so, and that is implicit and explicit. So I'm going to switch over here, and I'm going to walk you through shortly once the actual real tutorial begins. I'm going to walk you through creating this layout and how to look at it in terms of rows and columns and grid areas and naming them and grid lines and all that good stuff. So as always, make sure to subscribe if you haven't yet, and let's get it started. Let's take a minute to talk about the sponsor of this video, .online domain extension. We all need a platform to help showcase our creative work in the very best light. The thing about being a designer or developer is that you need to make sure you get the details right. And one of the ways you can do that is to build your portfolio on a .online domain extension. So if you're planning to build your own website, you should definitely begin your search with .online. It's new, it's trendy, and you're likely to find the choice of your name on .online. Go to www.get.online or click on the link in the description below to get your .online domain now. Okay, so right here we have this layout that I created in Adobe XD, and we're not going to fill in the contents of these blocks with this type-based content. Really, this is just to show you how to structure it using different CSS grid techniques. So I just wanted to get rid of all this stuff just so we can see the blocks container and then also the borders here that are going to define the CSS grid. And really, when you think about it, and before we start to actually define these grid areas, you have to think of your layout in terms of columns and rows. All right, so we have 3 columns here, and we have 4 rows. And so we can see it like this, completely getting rid of the entire UI and just overlaying with the UI to see how it works. As we can see, for instance, some of these, like this section, this whole section will span 2 columns, this first column and the second, and then it'll also span 2 rows, right here, the first and second. And like this image over here will span 3 columns. And it's our job as front-end developers to define these areas. I'm going to show you a couple approaches, 2 different ways of doing that. All right, so this is that same setup that we have going for the layout. And when we're using the approach of explicit naming of the CSS grid columns and rows, the columns start up here, and the first column, this line right here, is defined as being number 1, then 2, and then 3, and then 4. So we have 3 columns, but we have 4 vertical lines here. So they're named 1, 2, 3, and 4. Same thing with your rows. This line up here is number 1, then 2, 3, 4, 5, as we could see. And that's still true. We still have 4 rows, but nonetheless, we have 5 lines here. So they're all named, and we can use this, as you'll see shortly, in order to define these different grid blocks. So if you're a little bit confused at this point, don't worry. You'll start to understand it. There's also negative values, which have certain purposes that you can use. We're not going to use any negative values to define our grid areas, but they do have certain advantages in certain situations that you can use. I'm not going to cover it here. I think that could be a different tutorial. It's a little bit more of an advanced concept. All right, so what we're going to do, I'm going to minimize this. We're going to come back actually to this, and this will start to make sense in a little bit. So what I want to do is go over to our HTML. We're going to start creating the HTML necessary based on the mockup that we have. All right, so get rid of that. All we can see it's happening here, by the way, just boilerplate HTML, empty body tag. We're referencing a main CSS. We're going to use a Sass in here, although we're not using any Sass specific functions, so you can just have a CSS file if you wish. And we'll get to the CSS after we create the necessary HTML elements that we want. So when it comes to a grid container, you want to have an overall container that defines the grid itself. So sometimes that could be the body tag itself. I'm going to choose to create a grid container class here. And what we'll do is inside, I just start from top to bottom. So if we bring back that element here, especially, let me go back to my Adobe XD template. Really, what I'm looking at this point, when I'm trying to define the HTML elements, which we're about to do, I'm not looking at this one. I'm not looking at these. That's for the CSS portion. I'm looking at the blocks that we see here. So really, it's this section and it's this right here. So we need context though, so I'm bringing back the whole full high fidelity prototype. What section is this? Well, the HTML semantic element for this could possibly be main. All right, so we're going to put, for this block, we're going to call it main. So coming back here, we'll just say main. And I'm just going to say main. I'm not putting any content inside of it. The next section, I don't know why my nav bar is not showing up for me. The next section could be, we can call this nom. So when you're using the CSS grid, the order of your HTML elements isn't all that important in terms of like which comes first, like header or whatever, because we use the CSS grid to position these elements on the grid container. So what would be next, instead of me reverting back and forth, the next section would be like this right here, then this, then this, then this, and then this right here. All right, so we essentially have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 items that we need to place on that grid container. So we can see them here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right, so hopefully that makes sense at this point. So we're going to have a section. I guess we'll call it a section. We'll give this a class because we have 2 of them that are styled the same. This will be nom, as in nom, whatever. And then this one will be yum. And again, going back to our template really quickly, I don't want to lose people. Not that one. We'll go back, just to show you here. That's the nom section. This is the yum section. We'll call this one diabetes. Get diabetes in 1 week with our candies. They're so good. So we'll do that. This will be another section. This will be a header. This is just going to be a div span of some sort. All right, so next up, it'll be diabetes. All right. Next up after that will be the header. And then finally, I was going to use an image for this, but I decided to use CSS background property so I can use the background position cover property for this. So we're just going to call this class of candy, div class candy. All right, and just leave it blank. All right, and that's it. That's all we need to do at this point. Now we're going to head to the CSS. And so just to get the body stuff out of the way, all right, now we're going to target our grid container, which is the parent HTML element here. So what we want to do is first display grid. All right, this in and of itself doesn't really do anything. In fact, if I right click, open with live server so we can see what's happening here. So we'll go ahead and check this out. I'm going to check it out in Firefox, not Chrome. And that's because Firefox, here's the page. I open with a live server over there. Get the live server extension for Visual Studio Code, by the way. You simply just right click, open with live server. So go to the plugins and install the live server. I also have live SAS compilation. And so I'm using Firefox here specifically because if you Control-Shift-I, you get out the inspector, and then it'll show you the grid that you currently have going on here. Now, just because we have CSS or the display grid property, we don't have enough to work off. You can see these little tabs here. If you turn on the display inline numbers, you'll see how this works here in a second, though. So continuing on, we want to think about we'll think about our columns first. How many columns do we actually have? So we don't have 4 columns. Remember, we have 3. 1, 2, 3. All right, and we also have to think about the spacing between them. They're all almost the same size, although this is like a little bit larger. I'm going to use fraction units for defining these. So the first column we'll just call 1FR. The second column is slightly larger, so we'll say that's like 1.2. And then this one we'll say is like 1.5. All right, so grid template columns will be 1FR, 1.2FR, and 1.5FR. And that's it. You just separate these with spaces. So the next up is grid template rows. So going back to our mock-up here, we'll see we have 1, 2, 3, 4 rows. And keeping in mind the distance between or the size of each of these, we could think about how to just set up those fraction units. This part's pretty big, so we'll choose 1FR for the first one. In relation to that, we'll say the next one's like 4 times the size, 3, and then 2FR. So let's save this, and we're going to go back to our Firefox. And now it's a little bit more structured out, although it's still really screwed up, but that's fine. What we can see here, if we display the display line numbers, we can see that we have up here, they're kind of hard to see still. In fact, before I try to get to this, let's define a little bit more CSS in this area. For instance, we'll say height is 100 viewport height, margin 2em, just so we can push it away from the sides. So we save that, we'll go back. There we go, it's a little bit easier to read. So we can see on the columns itself, it says 1, 2, 3, and 4. That's the name of those grid column lines. Same thing with the rows, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then all the way down here is 5. All right, so it's set up just like my little mock-up that I had here. Same thing, same concept. So now let's go ahead and use these grid columns, or numbers and rows to define the areas of our layout. So here's how this works. The first one we'll just tackle the order right here. So we don't have to, but I'm just going to go from top to bottom. So main. What is main? Well, main is this section in our mock-up. So if I come back over here, main is this whole section. Main, 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 and main. And so what we ask ourselves when we're defining this next set of properties, grid column start, well, it starts at 1, this column right here, right? And then grid column end, it starts on this one, 3. So it starts at 1 and ends at 3. So we're going to try those 2 CSS properties first. So we target main, and we say grid column start 1, grid column end is 3. All right. Now we defined the columns here. And by the way, I'm going to show you 2 other methods, shorthand methods for doing this. This is a little bit verbose, as it's referred to as. We have to define the rows of this section as well. So going back to our XD template, it starts at row line 1, this line right here, and it ends at row line 3. All right, so it's almost the same thing, except we change this to row. All right, now let's give it a background color just so that we can see the actual block pretty easily. Now if we go back to our template, there we go. We've now just defined it. It says main in here. It's kind of hard to see, but we can see this has been defined. So if we show grid area names, I'm not sure where this one is exactly showing up. We'll see it in a second, I think, once we get all the other properties. So this is the main block. All right. So now I'm going to show you a shorthand method for this. What you could say instead of all of those, we could say grid column. So we omit the start and end. We can just include it in the property now. So the start is 1. All right, right here. The end is 3. So you put a slash, a /3. So now we can get rid of these 2 properties. And we'll see that if we go back to our example, still works. Same thing with row. So grid row, it's the same thing. So let's hit save, come back. There we go. Very good. So now what we can do, there's even a shorter method of defining these 4 values, and that's just simply using grid-area. So we could say it starts with 1, our grid row start. That's the first column. Then it starts with grid column start. So that would be this one right here. This next one would be grid row end, which is 3, and grid column end, which is 3. So if I delete all of these, just get this a little bit more organized, we'll see now it still works just the same. Freaking awesome, right? All right, so now it's just a matter of doing that same process for all of the other elements. So if we come out here, let's tackle the nom one, because that's the next one. Just looking at our template real quickly, we have main, we have nom now. Okay, so we'll do nom. So nom starts, we're gonna do the row first. It starts on, let's see, 3 for the row, ends on 4. For the column, it starts on 1 and ends at 2. All right, so we are going to target section.nom, and grid area here is 3, and then it starts on the column 1, ends at the row 4, and ends at the column 3. So it gets a little confusing. I'm going to show you what I think is an even easier method than all this stuff afterwards. So that's our section nom. That happens to have the color code, so we can see it, 3333. So now if I go back here to our example, there we go. I think that could be a potentially off. This is probably supposed to be 2, right? Because we only want to, looking at our mockup, and sometimes this will happen, our mockup is just going from 1 to 2 for nom. So yeah, we need to fix that. My reference code was wrong. What am I doing? So again, this is the row and the column. This should be 2. So now going back, here we go. Awesome. So you can see right here, header is sitting, and that's completely not, the yum is actually showing up right here right now. So that's the power of placing these items. So let's do the yum section now. So yum, we're going to go back to our little template here. So yum is right here. So it starts on 3, ends at 4, just the same as nom. So those values are going to be the same. But it starts at 2, ends at 3 in terms of the columns. So 3, 4, the same, 2, 3, we increase those. And let's change the background color. This is one that was slightly different with 202020 color code. So now we go back. There we go. We got that one. All right. So next up after that is the diabetes section, which is under here. So again, this starts at 1. Oh, it starts at 4 on the row front, and then ends at 5. And then it starts at 1 here on the column front and ends at 3. All right. Hopefully this is making sense so far. So section diabetes, let's just copy this. So this here starts at 4, ends at 5 for the rows, and then goes from 1 to 3. And let's see here. Oh, this is diabetes. Oh, okay, I had my colors mixed up, I think. This nom is supposed to be this color. This is supposed to be 333333. There we go. All right, now let's check this back out. Hopefully it's working correctly. There we go. So notice how nom or diabetes is down here now. Now we have the header and then the image. All right, so the header portion is going to start at 1 because that's where the row, and then it ends at 2. And then the column is 3, and then ends at 4. All right. So hopefully this is all clicking now. Again, I think there's personally an easier way that I like to use. So header is no background color, it's just white. So again, it was 1 to 2, correct? Yep. And then 3 to 4. All right, so I think it was already in place anyhow, which may happen sometimes. But yeah, there it is. It's up here. Now we define the image, which is a class of candy. So copy this. The grid area for that, one final time. It starts on 2 for the row and ends at 5. So it's 2, 5. And then the column is 3, 4. So 2, 5, 3, 4. All right. So now let's also, I'm going to give it a background here. I have a candy, or I didn't have a candy. Let me open that up in my other folder here. I'm going to drag candy in there. There you go. Okay. So now if we save this and we go back, there we go. So now if I toggle all this stuff off, you could then put all the rest of the content that you need to in those actual selectors in order to get this working. So I'm going to show you a different way of setting all this stuff up. So I'm going to go ahead and we're going to get rid of the values that we currently have specified here. We're going to use different values coming up here in a bit. So just get rid of all these. All right. So I want to show you one last time this section right here. So what we can do is just give these names instead of having to refer to them. So this would be implicit instead of explicit, where you specify the grid numbers, the column and row numbers. This will be specifying these elements and defining these blocks by names. All right. So right now I just have the selectors or the HTML elements in here. So we can see this is main, 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 simply because if we go back to our design, that's the block of this section, right? So we're going to basically type this all out in a CSS property rather, in this order. So you'll see what I mean here in a second. So we add a grid template areas property, and then it makes it easier to visualize this, puts this on multiple lines here. And we basically just type out that same thing. So here's the first row, okay, in terms of columns. So we have a main column, we'll call it, and a header. You can give these whatever names you want. I'm just choosing to name it based on that template that I have set up right here, okay? So that's main, main header. Next row would be main, main candy. So we'll do that. So main, main candy. What's up after that? Well, we have our nom yum candy. Okay, so nom yum candy. And then finally, we also have our footer candy. Okay, so footer. All right, so we can space these out a little bit more to make it a little bit more easier to understand what's happening here. It won't break the code or anything. Oh, I shouldn't have done that. There we go. Start with the other columns first. All right, and then we end it with a semicolon. So this is it. This is how we define our grid template areas. You can see that the sections of our layout are now named. All right, so now all we have to do, let's type in main here. All right, so that's the grid area. It's going to be associated with the blocks defined here. So it's going to take 2 columns and 2 rows. And then we're also going to, for nom, just name that nom, yum. Diabetes, I named footer instead. Header, it's going to be header. Oh, What is that? Why do I have multiple? Okay, well, we can just, oh, this one was supposed to be, oh, I screwed that up from the previous one. Candy, there we go. All right, so candy, that will be candy, I think, right? Yep. And then grid area is header here. Okay. So we save this, we go back to our Firefox, and guess what? It still works. So if I go out to our inspector, all right, and then we do the grid overlay option, and then we display the named areas, there we go. So footer, nom, yum, main, header, candy. Hopefully now you have a pretty solid grasp of the different ways that you can structure your layouts using implicit and explicit CSS grid methods. All right, so hopefully you enjoyed that, and now you have a much more solid understanding of how to use the CSS grid, which has a good amount of support now to structure your layouts. All right, so as always, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you guys soon. Goodbye.